Okay, we're running a couple minutes late. Let's get started, and when people are still trickling in, it's a great morning session, and then we're still having a very exciting afternoon session. Our first speaker is Dr. Richard Tremblay. He is an emeritus professor of pediatrics and psychology at the University of Montreal, as well as a professor of early childhood development in the School of Public Health at University College of Dublin. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the Academy of Experimental Criminology. The title of his talk is Developmental Origins of Chronic Physical Aggression from Social Learning to Epigenetics. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a very interesting meeting with a lot of diversity pointing in an interesting direction. I started working 40 years ago with criminal and mentally ill offenders. And if I ask the question, when should Hercules fight Hydra? It's because I've been asking myself that question over and over for the years, and I hope the young people in this room will have a better answer than I had when I started my career, sort of at the end of the story rather than at the start of the story. I'll start with criminological data. This is, for criminologists, the strongest evidence there is in criminology. It's the age crime curve. Data from Canada showing that with age during adolescence, both for violent and property offenses, the being accused of crime, you are more and more at risk with age. It peaks during early adulthood and then decreases with age. That was known in 1831 when Adolphe Quetelet, an astronomer, mathematician, looked at the statistics of French prisons and drew that age crime curve. At the same time, he's the one who invented the body mass index. So a lot of things important today have been known for quite a while. And in any country, you will find this age crime curve. Some 20 years ago, the panel on understanding and control of violent behavior for the US National Academy of Sciences had this to say about the age crime curve. Modern psychological perspective emphasized that aggressive and violent behaviors are learned responses to frustration, that they can also be learned as instruments for achieving goals, and that the learning occurs by observing models of such behavior. Such models may be observed in the family, among peers, elsewhere in the neighborhood, through the mass media. So, the age crime curve, the explanation for the age crime curve in terms of violence was, apparently, we learn to do these things, and it takes a while, so it peaks in adolescence. The World Report on Violence and Health in 2002 quoted a youth violence report from the Surgeon General of the United States. The majority of young people who become violent are adolescent limited offenders who, in fact, show little or no evidence of high levels of aggression or other problem behaviors during their childhood. In the early 1980s, we decided to study the development of physical aggression starting in kindergarten. And so we took a sample of 1,000 boys from poor areas in Montreal, kindergarten children, and we followed them over time looking for the causes of the age crime curve. The surprising results was that in terms of trajectories of physical aggression with these low SES boys, 14% showed almost no physical aggression from kindergarten up to age 15. The majority, 53%, showed physical aggression in kindergarten, and the frequency decreased over time. 28% had high levels of physical aggression in kindergarten, and the frequency decreased over time. And 4% of the boys had high levels of physical aggression from kindergarten up to adolescence. We were extremely surprised when we saw these trajectories and wondered whether the French-Canadian boys were different from the rest of the world, having been dominated by the English or something like that. But these curves have been reproduced since then over time in most countries. The interesting fact is that physical aggression is not increasing with age, it's decreasing, but also they are at their peak in adolescence. This is a recent paper on serious violent crimes by youth and video game sales in the US. And the point that Ferguson was making here is that although video games, the sales of video games has increased tremendously since the early 1990s, the violence by youth has substantially decreased. So the social learning hypothesis of youth learn to aggress by observing violence doesn't appear to work very much with data from longitudinal studies of children over time and from this type of general data in populations. What we observed with the 4%, the boys who were chronically physically aggressive from kindergarten to adolescence, was that obviously they failed in school. They were tobacco, alcohol, and drug users and abusers, early sex, violence, depression, unemployment, and poverty. Interestingly, we also had a representative sample of the population, and we could look at girls. And what we saw for girls who had relatively high aggression and hyperactivity, because girls use aggression much less than boys and appear to learn earlier not to use it. The girls on the high trajectory also had tobacco abuse, school failure, early sex, partner aggression, depression, teenage pregnancy, and welfare. It's a similar picture in terms of development for boys and girls, but the level of aggression of boys is much higher, and we tend to focus on the boys' violence. So the question became, when does physical aggression start? I had started being interested when they were criminal adults. Now I had started at kindergarten and said, well, when does it start? So we created another longitudinal study of a large population cohort in the province of Quebec. And so we've been following the development of physical aggression from very early on. And there's 6 months. It's a picture that was taken by the mother of the boy on the right, who, the boy on the right is the grandson of one of my good friends, and he sent me that picture and he said, look, my grandson is doing the things you are studying. And so I asked the mother, can I use this picture when I make presentation? And she said, yes, but at one condition. You must say that he was only defending himself. So it's clear, if you aggress, mother said it, you're only defending yourself. Now I'll show you another example of aggression, but this is a more lively one. It's a video.
Frappe violemment. Maxime ne veut pas partager ses jouets. Aujourd'hui, à Dr Nadia, psychologue à domicile.
Ça se résume souvent par une claque. Il est assis sur quelque chose, il pousse, il le jette à terre. C'est assez violent comme conflit quand ça éclate. Puis il élève le ton. Comment vous intervenez quand il y a un conflit?
Okay, so they are 2 and 3.5. You don't have to know French to understand what's going on. And you can see French Canadians are aggressive very early on. They can take on the Bruins. I wanted to wear my Canadian sweater today, but I said I won't do that. So, and you can see that it's not poverty. You can see all the toys there. It's not a lack of toys. Children fight for toys even if there are many, many toys. So the results from that study in terms of developmental trajectories of aggression is that physical aggression appears between 12 months and 17, 18 months. It increases in frequency up to about 42 months and then starts decreasing. So physical aggression is, as everyone who has lived with young children, is normal. What we learn is not to aggress. We don't learn to aggress, we learn not to aggress. And the learning is done in early childhood. Now, this is 2 different sets of data. The data starting at 17 months, and then another study starting at 6 years of age, where we're putting the 2 curves together. But you can see that those who are the chronic aggressive, they start like the other ones, but the frequency is much lower. And with age, they also learn not to aggress, but it takes much more time. And by 21 years of age, the differences in terms of frequency of aggression is very low. So the age crime curve, if we compare the age crime curve to the actual frequency of physical aggression, so what we see is the peak of frequency of physical aggression is very early on, but the arrests are done much later. And to a certain extent, it appears to be a product of to what extent the environment tolerates the behavior depending on body size. What the 2-year-olds are doing, we don't mind much because the impact on adults is not that important. But take a 2-year-old, give him a body of an 18-year-old, nobody wants to live with that 2-year-old. So the reaction to the problem is coming too late. For those who have problems with learning to control physical aggression. So, conclusions from the developmental stuff is that humans do not learn to physically aggress. They learn not to physically aggress. Chronic physical aggression starts in early childhood. It's very rare that it's late onset. From the available evidence, this may be true for other antisocial behavior problems, such as stealing and destruction of property. These stealing and destruction of property is extremely frequent, also very early in childhood, but we don't use these words to describe the behavior. So what are the causal mechanisms behind chronic physical aggression? This is where Hydra comes. If we look at the predictors of chronic physical aggression, we have teenage pregnancy, maternal low education, poor marital relationships, poverty, maternal anger, maternal smoking, maternal depression, maternal stress, and maternal nutrition during pregnancy. I call it Hydra in the sense that these things come together. They're highly correlated, and if we try to address one, the others take over. So we need to address most of these problems at a given time. Now, let's come back to the girls' development. The girls who are aggressive, hyperactive, they have tobacco abuse, school failure, early sex, partner aggression, depression, teenage pregnancy, welfare. So they are the ones who are reproducing another generation of children who have these problems. So I think a number of talks this morning were indicating to this intergenerational, and what we appear to be all doing is trying to identify what are the causal mechanisms and when should we intervene for prevention. One of the things that we've been doing is epigenetic work, where we are looking at to what extent there are differences between those who are on the chronic trajectory and those who are on the normal trajectory in terms of DNA methylation. So I'm going to go through a few of the results that we've published over the past 2 years. So young adult males with a history of chronic physical aggression have reduced plasma levels of cytokines. They have different DNA methylation profiles in cytokines and in their regulators in T cells and in monocytes. The chronically physically aggressive males compared to the normal group, we found 448 distinct gene promoters that were differently methylated. Functionally, many of these genes were previously shown to play a role in aggression and were enriched in biological pathways affected by behavior. The location of the genes tended to form clusters spanning millions of bases. When we looked at the females that had chronic physical aggression, we also observed genome-wide variation in promoter DNA methylation. A significant proportion of these associations were similar to those observed with CPA males. The epigenetic signature of childhood chronic aggression in females appears to have a component that's specific to females and another common to both males and females. Using PET measures of brain serotonin synthesis, we found that adult males with CPA had lower in vivo serotonin synthesis in the orbitofrontal cortex. We then showed that serotonin synthesis in the left and the right orbitofrontal cortex was also associated with DNA methylation level in T cells and monocytes. In vitro methylation of the serotonin synthesis promoters suppressed its transcriptional activity, supporting a functional role of DNA methylation in serotonin synthesis promoter regulation. These results indicate that brain serotonin synthesis alterations associated with chronic physical aggression during childhood are linked to differential DNA methylation of the serotonin synthesis promoter. So when and what type of environment creates these DNA methylation differences between the chronic aggressive and not aggressive? And as was discussed this morning, it could be that the life of a chronically aggressive child, whether females and males, create the DNA methylation differences, because what I've been describing is data from collected when they were adults, after we knew that they had a chronic physical aggression problem. So it could be, the cause could be their behavior, their lifestyle, but it could also be that the difference is there by the time they are young children, or during pregnancy, or at birth. To identify causality, and this is again a theme from this morning, we need randomized controlled trials with long-term follow-up. So the model, and that was discussed this morning, the model, one of the models is the work that Steve Sumi, following Harlow, has been doing with the monkeys that are separated for their mothers at birth. And we've published a paper with Steve on the differences in DNA methylation between these two groups of monkeys, those who were separated from their mothers and those who were not separated from their mothers. Now, we cannot do that with humans, separate them from their mothers, but as we've heard since this morning, there are many, many cases of children who are abused, neglected, and we can do the reverse, that is, intervene, help them, and see to what extent we can change DNA methylation, brain development, and behavior. There are quite a number of interventions that have been experimented over the past 30 years that have shown long-term impacts. Interventions during pregnancy and during early childhood that have shown long-term impacts. And these interventions have targeted parenting sensitivity and care, nutrition, language development, executive function development, pro-social skills, and discipline. So there isn't a lack of ideas about how we should go about to intervene and prevent these problems, but there is a lack of randomized controlled trials where you assess early on DNA methylation development, brain development, and behavior development. So we need these studies, these experiments, to be able to understand much better to what extent early interventions are, at what level the early interventions are having an impact. So my conclusions concerning when should Hercules fight Hydra, pre- and early postnatal environmental conditions associated with maternal life, as well as maternal physical and mental health, may have effects on DNA expression that lead to chronic physical aggression through impacts on brain development. By enriching the pre- and early postnatal environment with the appropriate intensity, we could probably have system-wide impacts on gene expression, brain development, chronic physical aggression, and other long-term physical and mental health problems. Environmental effects on human development, like genetic effects, appear strongly intergenerational and highly linked to maternal development, although it can also be linked to paternal development, as we heard this morning. If this is true, prevention of chronic physical aggression, mainly a male problem, and other related problems should start by supporting the development of at-risk girls, the future mothers, from their fetal development onwards. This has been said much better by someone I met in Zambia, the chief of the Soli people. She said, when you educate a man, an individual is educated. When you educate a woman, you educate her children and thus the nation. Thank you.
Been saying, they haven't been talking about epigenetics, but they've identified this problem for, well, I'll give away my age, but almost 40 years, 50 years, right? And the government doesn't fund more programs for young children. Where does it get held up? You would think that even the Tea Party would be interested in having less aggressive individuals.
I cannot answer for the United States, but I can tell you that Plato had said it, St. Augustine had said it, Erasmus had said it. I mean, they didn't have the science, but this idea that we need to support pregnant women and young children very early in life has been there for a very long time. I think we're doing better than we did in the time of Plato and Erasmus, and it seems to take a long time for humans to do these things and to do them well. But it's, I can tell you from my own perspective in terms of my career, it took me 40 years to start to understand that. And I consider that if in 100 years what I would like to see today will happen, I'll be very happy.
One, the data you showed on decreased cytokine and stress levels sort of goes along with some of the prior data on antisocial behavior and decreased amygdala activation. And it really raised the question of, is this really in the realm of externalizing versus internalizing? And these people are almost protected from stress through this behavior. And so, to what extent is it, in fact, partly a coping mechanism that a subgroup of people use? And then I guess my second part of that question is, to what extent has the age-old anecdote that the way you take care of boys' aggression is you put them in sports, and you have organized sports and you have organized aggression, and to what extent do our inner cities, by not having those sorts of things, is that a simplistic solution?
Well, your first question, we are looking at physical aggression, and these chronically physically aggressive boys are not only externalizers. It's a mix, and we would have to tease out to be able to answer that question. In terms of sports and reduction of physical aggression, what is clear is that we learn to control physical aggression, at least in males, very much through play fighting. Play fighting is an important part of the learning. If you don't learn to control yourself in a play fight, you hurt the other and they don't want to play with you anymore. So that the learning can be done through play fighting, and I think it should start very early, not in sports later on. It's very late. The advantage of play fighting in its general sense is there from, we can do it with tickling babies at 2-3 months of age upwards, and it's probably a lack of experience with play fighting that is part of the problem for some of the children. Unfortunately, mothers don't like very much play fighting, and they try to stop fathers from play fighting. And so children who have living alone with their mothers probably lack a lot of play fighting that would help.
Some of the lack of reciprocity issues we talked about with breast and PTSD moms, they're not going to be able to do that. Referee it in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.